Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to Trump Watch. In all the years I've been living on this good earth, I can't think of a time in which liberty has been more infringed upon, more destroyed than the times in which we're living. Things are pretty dark from a libertarian standpoint. I know that conservatives think they live in a free country and progressive leftists are convinced that they live in a free country. We libertarians know differently. We've broken through, we can understand reality, and like I say, I can't think of a time when things were worse. When you talk in terms of the genuine principles of liberty, the libertarian principles of liberty with respect to foreign policy, out of control federal spending, out of control debt, the socialist welfare state, the national security establishment, the power of assassination, including assassinating Americans, the drug war, the war on immigrants, the immigration police state. I mean, I could go on and on. It seems like everything has coalesced into a tyrannical society that both conservatives and progressives are convinced is freedom for and that's reflected in the surveys. Like we live in a free society. Thank God I'm an American because at least I know I'm free. That's what the average statist American believes. We libertarians know differently. But even in these dark times, one of the good things about conservatives, the right-wingers, is that they provide some amusement. And they oftentimes make me laugh, not overtly, not intentionally, but just by their actions. And I'm going to talk about an example in this week's Trump Watch. I'm going to divert myself here into just talking about an article that appeared in the right-wing press and analyze it and talk to you about it and the different ramifications. It bears indirectly on Donald Trump and the Trump administration. This is Trump Watch, after all. But it's more an area of amusement, which just has brought a smile to my face and actually laughter as I was reading this article. So I'm gonna talk about the article here in this week's Trump Watch. It appeared in Fox News, right-wing publication, a right-wing website. It was online, and it's about this subpoena that the U.S. government has issued to Hassan Piker and Medea Benjamin. Medea Benjamin is one of the co-founders of Code Pink. She's a progressive, ardent leftist. And they traveled to Cuba. And they, with goods and supplies, trying to help the Cuban people who were under siege, not only because of the embargo that the U.S. government has imposed on them, and specifically the National Security Branch of the federal government, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA for decades, over 60 years. But also this petroleum blockade. So they are on the verge of starvation, of dying, the Cuban people, by design. This is what the purpose of the blockade and the sanctions is to cause death by starvation on the Cuban populace in the hopes that they will rise up in a violent revolution, a regime change operation, and oust the Cuban communist regime from power and install a pro-U.S. Dictatorship there, similar to the Fulgencio Batista dictatorship that preceded the Cuban Revolution that brought into existence the communist regime there, Fidel Castro, and so forth. So, as part of this embargo that has long existed, the U.S. government punishes Americans who travel to Cuba and spend money there. Now, if you travel there, as I understand it, and you don't spend any money, then you're okay, because the federal government never wanted to make it look like they are infringing on freedom of travel. So they added the extra qualification: if you spend money. Well, it's pretty difficult not to go to a place and not spend money. You got hotel bills and food bills and whatever. And as soon as you spend just a penny, they got you. And as I've often said, this embargo is not just an attempt to kill Cuban people. It's a destruction of the rights and liberties of the American people. So when right-wingers have cheered this, and left-wingers have cheered it too, some left-wingers, not all of them, as we'll see in this article, but it's principally right-wingers that have cheered this embargo. What they don't realize is that they're cheering the destruction of their own liberty, of the liberty of the American people at the hands of our own government. Because if you go to Cuba and you spend money there without the official permission of the U.S. government, on your return, they will arrest you. They will prosecute you. They'll put you in jail. Okay, now they have two avenues though. They can fine you like civilly, or they can proceed against you criminally and lock you away for many years of your life. So the embargo is a destruction of freedom of association, freedom of travel, freedom of contract, freedom of association. I don't know if I mentioned that. Economic liberty. These are fundamental rights that this is what Jefferson was talking about. The right to life, the right to sustain one's life through labor, through entering into mutually agreeable economic relations with others, the pursuit of happiness. Some people find that happiness by traveling to Cuba and having a vacation there. But you see, they don't recognize that pursuit of happiness is a fundamental God-given right, even though the government doesn't, the federal government, even though it's part of the Declaration of Independence that they're going to be celebrating in July. All right, so what Benjamin and this guy Hassan Piker did, they're both leftists, progressives. They traveled to Cuba with goods and supplies and so forth. And boy, now the fangs of the U.S. empire are bearing themselves not just against the Cuban people, who they're trying to kill, but also against American citizens. And Benjamin and Piker, a classic example of this. Now, the article is written by a woman named, let me see, what is her name? Azra Q. Nomani. Now, I looked up Nomani, and she's about 60 years old, which puts her squarely in the Cold War environment, which is relevant, as you'll see. Now, she was born in India, and I thought, well, that's kind of odd, because this article would seem to be coming straight out of the Cold War. I mean, it could have fit into the Cold War racket. And, well, it turns out she moved here from India when she was 4 years old, and then she moved to West Virginia with her family, her parents. So she grew up here. So she would have been 16 years old in 1966. This was 3 years after the national security establishment assassinated President Kennedy. Now, why do I mention that? Well, because Kennedy was a president who broke through. He came into office as a classic Cold Warrior. The communists are coming to get us. He bought into this whole Cold War racket, like most every American did. But by the time of the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he had broken through, and he realized it was just a crock. Much like we libertarians break through to reality when our fellow Americans have been unable to do that. And so Kennedy was going to break the back of this Cold War racket. He went to war with the national security establishment that was dead set on continuing this Cold War racket. Now, what was the Cold War racket? Well, after World War II, there were people that wanted to turn America into a national security state. Obviously, during the war, the military intelligence segment of the government had been extremely powerful, and they didn't want to disband. And so they came up with a rationale for converting America to a national security state, which is a totalitarian form of governmental structure. It doesn't have to comply with the Bill of Rights. That's why you have these drug war assassinations in the high seas near South America, killing without due process of law in violation of the Fifth Amendment. They don't have to comply with the Fifth Amendment. A national security state has omnipotent powers of torture, powers of assassination. They can kill whoever they want, including American citizens. And so it was a revolutionary change in our governmental structure, done without even the semblance of a constitutional amendment. But the rationale was the Reds are coming to get us. The Soviet Reds are coming to get us. They said that there was an international communist conspiracy to take over the world, which is kind of ironic because whenever we document all the circumstantial evidence that establishes the national security state regime change operation against President Kennedy, what do they cry? Conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. Well, here is their conspiracy. They were convinced there was an international communist conspiracy to take over the world, centered in Moscow, and but also expanding to communist China and North Vietnam and North Korea, and then later in Cuba. And it was all the Reds are coming to get us. So the Reds are everywhere. Okay, when we were kids during the Cold War, this Cold War racket, we were exhorted to look under our beds for Reds. Okay, well, that's a nice little phrase. Look under your bed for Reds, kids. But there were Reds everywhere. You see, there were Reds in Hollywood. They went after them. Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And so they destroyed people. The government destroyed people who had had any association with communism. There were Reds in the Army and Reds in the White House. Some right-wingers were saying that President Eisenhower was a Red agent, and that they were coming to influence us, or they were coming to control us, or taking control of our public schools and teach communism in the public schools. And of course, that's what leads to the Korean intervention or war there, where 50, 60,000 American men are sacrificed for nothing. And then that's followed with the Vietnam War, where 56,000 of my generation were sacrificed for nothing. The dominoes never fell. The Reds never came. But Cuba was always centered of this because Cuba was a communist regime. So the CIA and the Pentagon, the NSA, they maintained that this was a grave threat to national security. The communists are right near. So there was all this play toward, what do we do about Fidel Castro? What do we do about the communists and the communists inside? They were convinced that Martin Luther King was a communist and that the civil rights movement was a communist front, that they weren't really fighting to end segregation. They were establishing a beachhead for the communist invasion of America. So it was a total racket, but it was designed to keep Americans afraid so that they would maintain this national security state form of governmental structure. The idea is that a national security state needs official enemies, keeps people riled up and afraid and so forth. And that was the racket here. And Americans fell for it. The national security state became larger and larger and much more destructive of our liberties. So Cuba has always been centered in this. Now, when the Cold War ended, the obsession with Cuba didn't end. Okay, they established relations with North Vietnam, which then became Vietnam, and President Trump establishes a personal relationship with Kim Jong-il, the president of North Korea. President Trump goes to communist China and talks with communist officials. But Cuba, no. The national security establishment has never forgiven Cuba for ousting Batista or the Cuban people. So this woman writes this article about Medea Benjamin and this guy, Hassan Piker, leftist, for traveling to Cuba to take essential supplies. And she says, she calls Piker a Marxist political influencer. Now, when I looked her up, I saw that she had also written for the Wall Street Journal, which of course is the premier or one of the premier right-wing publications in America. But this is on Fox, which, as everybody knows, is totally right-wing. But a Marxist political influencer. Ooh, now what is a Marxist political influencer? That's scary. Well, I guess it's somebody who tries to influence people to adopt Marxism. Well, that's scary. I don't want to run into Piker, man, and he might influence me into adopting Marxism. And so she goes on with her article that they supposedly violated U.S. sanctions laws through the financing, coordination, or delivery of goods to Cuba. Okay, now why are they doing that? Well, because the Cuban people are suffering mightily with this embargo and this oil blockade. They're trying to help them. And so they've been subpoenaed, though, by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control. Now that's a weird department, because she later points out that in this department there's strict liability. They don't have to prove intent. Okay, I mean, this shows you how this Cold War mindset has destroyed liberty in America, and the policies of it. That they can fine you without proving that you intended to do anything. Now, if they criminally prosecute you with the Justice Department, they got to prove intent, which is always an essential aspect, an element of a crime. But it's like civil asset forfeiture, where they just stop cars on the highway and they steal their money. They don't ever charge them with a crime. And this is akin to that. So they've issued these administrative subpoenas telling them that we want information on your trip to Cuba. You see, so now everybody knows about the Fifth Amendment. All they got to walk in and say, we're not going to respond to you on grounds of the Fifth Amendment. But you see, you got to hire a lawyer. You got to go through the hassle of this thing. And the idea that a government can force a citizen to come into their offices and answer their questions. I mean, you couldn't ask for better evidence of a master and serf relationship. That they are the masters, okay? They are ordering the citizen, you come in here with your records. We want to see what you did in Cuba. Now, what's the big deal of traveling to Cuba? I mean, you just think about it. Why shouldn't people be free to spend money and assist people who are dying, or even if they're being targeted by the U.S. government? But no, they are communist sympathizers. You see, she points that out too. That this group Medea Benjamin, she's the co-founder of Code Pink, as I indicated. That some of other people that went with them are communist sympathizers. Well, this is straight out of the Cold War. Let me emphasize something. In a genuinely free society, people have a right to sympathize with whoever they want. People have a right to be communists. This is what the right wing didn't understand during the whole Cold War racket. The government had no legitimate authority to investigate people in the Communist Party. If you want to be a communist in a free society, that is your right. You want to be a Marxist, you want to be a Marxist political influencer, that's part of living in a free society. You can be with whoever you want, as long as you're not initiating force against somebody. And they're saying, oh, well, they're sympathizing. Let me see. That they supposedly bragged about a global network of communist sympathizers, activists, influencers who brought supplies to the country's ruling Communist Party of Cuba. Well, and they also pointed out that when they got there, they're investigating whether they made contact with Cuban government officials or Cuban government personnel. Well, everybody in Cuba works for the government. Okay, remember, it's a totally socialist country. There's no private property. There's no private jobs. So if you talk to anybody, you're talking to a government employee or government personnel. And so what? I've traveled to Cuba. I spoke to government personnel. I gave presentations at the University of Havana, which is a state-supported university, or state university, just like state universities here. And so I spoke to government officials there, and I spoke to people on the street who work for the government. Now, I had permission of the Cuban regime to do this. I had permission of the U.S. government to do it. But, does that make me a communist sympathizer that I talk to people? I don't think so. It's just so ridiculous. And so she says, the Justice Department, Treasury, and State are trying to curb malign foreign influence operations inside the United States. Now, what do I care about whether the Cuban government's trying to influence things in the United States? If I were the Cuban regime, I'd try to influence things in the United States too, away from the aggression that the U.S. government, and specifically the national security branch of the government, the most powerful branch, has always done against Cuba. Look, they invade Cuba. a country that has never attacked the United States. They engage in assassination attempts against Cuba's leader. They enter into a partnership with the mafia. I'm referring to the CIA here. They have Operation Northwoods. This is a false flag operation that the Pentagon presented to President Kennedy that involved real terrorist attacks on American soil by CIA operatives posing as Cuban agents, where real people were going to get killed, real Americans, but they were sacrificial lambs, because then Kennedy would be able to say, oh, the Cubans have attacked us. We have no choice but to invade Cuba again. They talk about terrorists, and she talks about terrorists in this article. And, what better example of terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism, than invading a country and killing people there, Cuban citizens, Cuban soldiers, in a total act of aggression or assassination? That's just murder. And then there was Operation Mongoose, where it really called for state-sponsored terrorism by the U.S. government. She didn't mention any of that in here. That Cuba has never, ever engaged in an act of terrorism, assassination, attempted assassination, anything. Now, she does bring up I'm not sure it's in this article or another article about I think it was the Cuban Five, where Cuba sent some spies over here, and they got huge long jail sentences. But what were they spying about? They were spying about efforts to do acts of terrorism in Cuba. In other words, they were trying to acquire information to defend themselves against acts of terrorism against Cuba. And for that, they were punished by the U.S. government when they caught them. In other words, their spying was never intended to set the basis for a Cuban invasion of the United States, where the Cuban army takes Miami and heads up the eastern seaboard to take over the capital and the public schools in America and so forth. Now, one of the interesting parts about this is that she mentions a guy. Okay, she says, according to a Fox News digital investigation, Singham has pumped $278 million into non-profit groups. So I read this, and I said, well, Singham, who is Singham, or what is Singham? Is it a company? And so I figured, I probably just missed it earlier in the article. She must have explained who Singham was. So I did a search real quick, and there's no reference to this Singham before this. This is poor proofreading. This is poor editing on the part of Fox Digital. It's poor writing on her part. That when you're going to mention a brand new name, Singham, which turns out to be a person, you always use the first name first, and you explain who he is. You don't just go, Singham has pumped $278 million, as if everybody knows who Singham is. I don't know who Singham is, but you would think they'd have a proofreader at Fox News, but apparently not. So, she has a link under that, so I clicked on that. Oh, it's another article by this woman, and we're a deep investigation into who Singham is. And Singham is this guy, multimillionaire, leftist, progressive, that has pumped money into different organizations. And so she did this extensive investigation as to the Singham network and so forth. It's like, wow. I really got the feeling that I was living in the Cold War as I'm reading through her articles, and that wasn't the only one. Then there's another, you click through and you find that there's another article by this woman on this whole thing. She is I get the feeling she's obsessed by this thing. And it's, the organization of the Singham Network, from the Venceremos Brigade to People's Forum, a hub for communist causes in New York City. Okay, there's that Cold War deal. We're leaders of Nuestra American Convoy, which included an estimated 650 delegates from 33 countries and 120 organizations. The organizations included Democrat Socialists of America, a U.S. nonprofit that promotes Piker as a headline member. See? It's like, the Reds are back. And this was what the whole idea behind NATO provoking the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because the Cold War was such a good racket that the national security establishment didn't want to lose it, but the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union dismantled unilaterally, gets out of Eastern Europe, says we're done. And so there was going to be this period of time of harmony between Russia and the United States and China, and for a while there was. But the national security establishment would not tolerate that. It had been too good a racket. Now, of course, then they go into 9/11, which gives them the war on terrorism. Now they're off to the races, because now terrorism replaced communism, and boy, out of control budgets and spending and fear mongering and so forth, and all because the terrorists are coming to get us. And to a certain extent, the Muslims are coming to get us, but it's mostly the terrorists. In fact, she makes a reference in here to this guy Pike. I forget his name. Piker. Piker said something about, according to her, that the U.S. deserved 9/11. Well, nobody deserves anything like that, a terrorist attack. But he later said, well, that's not what I meant. I used poor phraseology. And my hunch is that what he meant to say was that the terrorists on 9/11 were motivated by what the U.S. government was doing in the Middle East. In other words, killing people. Remember Madeleine Albright's famous statement that the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children from the sanctions against Iraq, which were the same type of sanctions against Cuba, were worth it, worth regime change. So that's the whole idea of these sanctions, that if Cubans have to die in mass, who cares? Iraqis died in mass. Regime change is what matters here. But after 9/11, when we libertarians were saying, this is what motivated them. Oh, you're a defender of terrorism, Jacob. You're defending them. You're justifying them. It was ridiculous, because the official narrative was they attacked because they hate us for our freedom and values. Now, this is assuming that this wasn't an inside job, as many of the truth movement contend. A lot of reputable people contend that. But if you just take the official narrative that this was a terrorist attack, it was clear what the motivation is. But they were saying, no, Jacob, they hate us for our freedom and values. They hate us because of rock and roll, and this attack just came out of nowhere, which is ridiculous. Because if you go back to the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, which is exactly the same kind of attack, just didn't bring down the towers, they caught a guy there named Ramzi Youssef, and he, at sentencing, he said, you call me the terrorist, fine, but you're the butchers. He's essentially saying, you all are the terrorists. You're over here killing all these children in Iraq. When you are targeting innocent people as a way to get a political goal, that's the essence of terrorism. And my hunch is that this is what this guy Piker did meant when he said that. But for a right winger, you can't go down that road, because it means criticizing state-sponsored terrorism on the part of the U.S. government, which doesn't even compute in the minds of many right wingers. Now, she says there was 40 American citizens, that there's a huge dragnet by this Office of Foreign Assets Control that is going to cover as many as 40 American citizens who are part of a global network of anti-U.S. Marxists, communists, and socialists. Additional subpoenas are expected. You see, because this is scary stuff. These are Marxists that are coming to get us, and they're promoting regimes like Cuba and China. I don't know why she doesn't mention Vietnam. That's the one that killed 56,000 American citizens. This is one of the funniest parts. So this is funny. So she says, who is Hassan Piker? So she says he's a far left streamer. She's got a picture of him with his dog. Well, it turns out that she's upset about matters relating to his dog. She says he posted a photo of himself on Instagram with a message, all in capitals, "I'm going to Cuba." Woo! Oh my gosh, she's going to Cuba. Now get this. She says, in an Instagram post from the trip, Singham's wife, Evan, smiled widely in Havana. Can you imagine? that shows you there's some dangerous stuff here that she smiles widely in Havana. Wearing a red and white Palestinian scarf. Oh, boy. Now, so here we got a communist and a pro-Palestinian sympathizer. Well, I don't know if she's pro-Palestinian sympathizer. She got a Palestinian scarf, but, ooh, man, that's scary stuff around her neck. While standing beside Piker, who looked seriously into the camera. Oh, my. Is that not scary when somebody looks seriously into the camera? So she talks about the dog, Piker's dog, Kaya, which is, let me see if she talks, I think she describes what kind of dog it is. Oh, yeah, a mix of Tibetan Mastiff, Chow Chow, and St. Bernard. Now, you may ask, what's the dog have to do with this? Is he a communist sympathizer too? Well, it turns out, according to this lady on Fox News, that there's controversy over Free Kaya. Allegations that Piker trained Kaya with a shock collar that transmits painful stimuli as part of behavior training. Now, anybody that's familiar with dog training knows that a shock collar is not like torture or anything. It's a small little ping, depending on where you set it, that helps in dog training. Now there's a group. Let me pull it up right quick. If you don't believe me, there's a group in New York called the Monks of Newskeet. Now, Newskete, and you can go to newskeet.org, newskete.org, and go to their. This is a group of monks. I mean, these are very religious people, and they this is their lives. They devoted their lives to God. They have the most phenomenal German Shepherd operation here. I mean, they train dogs. They raise German Shepherds. I forget how much they sell them for, but they're enormously priced, and they're very well bred, and you have to qualify. They take applications for their dogs. They're very careful about how which people they're going to sell their dogs to. I mean, these are very, very conscientious people. And if you see their website, it's very impressive. You can, their website has explore monastic life, worship, visit and events, and they're located in Newskeet, New York. But part of their training is using one of these e-collars. So here's standard board and train 2.5 weeks. This is where you take your dog, and for 2.5 weeks, it's $3,700, okay? And in one of the sections, how to gently teach good behavior using an e-collar, okay? So these are not torturers. These are monks, okay? And they're world-renowned. Their dog training program is world-renowned. Well, you can imagine, $4,000 for almost $4,000 for 2 weeks. But, boy, this lady here in Fox News thinks, boy, there's something going on here with dog torture, So the whole thing is really funny. Now, the reason I bring up Kennedy, as I said earlier, is that Kennedy comes into office as a standard Cold Warrior. He immediately goes to war against the CIA because the CIA had lied to him about needing air support for the invasion of Cuba. And remember, Kennedy was a standard Cold Warrior at this time. They lied to him and said, we won't need the air support, when they knew they needed it. But they figured that Kennedy, as a neophyte president, would come in and have to provide the air support rather than let these people be massacred, the Cuban exiles who were really CIA operatives. And so they were manipulating Kennedy. The CIA had virtually full power under the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower was old. The CIA essentially had free reign during his 8 years. And so Kennedy comes in and says, figure we can outsmart this guy. We can outmaneuver this guy. And Kennedy said no. When the thing started to go down in defeat, he said, no, you told me you didn't need the support. I told you you're not going to get the support. That's it. And so it went down in defeat. And the CIA was livid. They considered him a coward, an incompetent, a red, well, at least a coward before the Reds. And so, and Kennedy was livid too. He vowed to destroy the CIA. I mean, this starts the war between Kennedy and the national security establishment. But Kennedy continues to be a standard Cold Warrior. He just is trying to rein in the CIA, limit its power, which is omnipotent power. So the CIA ignores him, enters into this partnership with the mafia to assassinate Castro. Kennedy was totally opposed to state-sponsored assassinations. But the CIA's power was too much. And so by the time the Cuban Missile Crisis comes, Kennedy achieves this breakthrough and realizes this is just a bunch of bull. It's crud. And it's getting the country in worse shape, and it's getting the world dangerously close to nuclear war. So he achieves this breakthrough that realizes it's a racket. And so he essentially declares war against the national security establishment. So it's their vision against Kennedy's vision. Now, Kennedy's vision is, we can get along. He wasn't worried about Marxist influencers and the Chinese are coming to get us and the Russians are coming to get us. He goes to American University and he essentially declares an end to the Cold War. He says, look, we're going to get along from here on out. And Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was on the exact same page. So he was making nice with the communists, okay, which was anathema to the right-wingers, and especially the right-wing national security establishment, which has always been right-wing. But this was life or death because this was a grave threat to national security. And when people say, oh, Jacob, conspiracy theory, what they're ignoring on all this is that from the standpoint of the national security establishment, Kennedy really did pose a grave threat to national security. I mean, look, if this guy Piker and Medea Benjamin are a threat to national security, if Cuba, this hollowed out third world country, is a grave threat to national security, what about a president of the United States that's making nice with the Reds? On the day they assassinated him, he had an emissary in Havana having lunch with Fidel Castro with the aim of establishing normalized relations, which would have meant lifting this idiotic, destructive, deadly embargo. There never would have been this petroleum blockade. There had been normal relations, Americans traveling to Cuba, spending money there, going on vacation, which is the best way to limit the power of a communist regime. This is what the right wing has never understood. That freedom and free markets is your best way to combat socialism and communism. Not by a national security state, which is the exact same type of governmental structure that communist regimes have. See, their idea was, we got to fight communism with communism. And here's another thing. They rail against socialism and communism. Right? I mean, like it reeks through this article. Oh, the communists this and the socialists this and the group of socialists there, and this is all, like I said, Cold War stuff. I mean, if you can go back, there was an organization called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which included a lot of reputable people, and some of them sympathized with Cuba. They were socialist, leftists. So what? You have a right to do that in a free society. Boy, not during the Cold War racket. Oh, no, man, you were a grave threat to national security. So they were spying on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. In fact, Lee Harvey Oswald was a member of the sole member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, when in reality, he was just a government agent. I mean, how many Marines do you know are communists? The whole official narrative has been ridiculous from the beginning. But the hypocritical irony in this is that if you take socialist programs here in America, like Social Security, they don't call it Social Security for nothing, Medicare, public schooling, the central planning of the immigration control state to secure the border with that Berlin Wall down there, which of course is modeled after the Berlin Wall, or at least it could serve as a model. That, my gosh, Americans believe in socialism. See, I mean, I don't know where this woman, the author, Azra Nomani, I don't know where she stands on Social Security and Medicare, but I'm willing to bet she's a supporter of these socialist programs and public schooling. and immigration controls. I bet she's supportive of all of it. But, we got to rail against these. And now here's the ultimate, though. You see, she makes a big deal out of Piker and Medea Benjamin interacting with socialists and talking to communists in Cuba and influencer and all this. What she doesn't mention anywhere in this article is that the Trump administration is doing that. That's what Venezuela's all about. And the CIA and the Pentagon. They're over there interacting with the socialist, communist, narco-terrorist regime in Venezuela. Remember, we went through decades of this. Same sanctions like they got against Cuba right now, like they have against Iran. We went decades with Venezuela, where they were trying to oust the communist socialist regime there. Now they're working with it. They're partnering with it. Now Trump says, well, we're going to make, maybe we can make Venezuela the 51st state. No, you can't, because then you have to have elections. Under our Constitution, a state has to have elections, has to have a Republican form of government. They won't allow elections in Venezuela. The U.S. national security state won't allow them. The communist terrorist regime there. So they're working with them. They're partnering with them. They're talking to the CIA directors down there talking to this communist regime. They're working together. So how come this lady rails against Medea Benjamin and doesn't say anything about U.S. officials that are doing the same thing with the communist socialist regime? And even worse, it's a narco-terrorist regime. They told us that for decades. So now they're partnering with them. So I read this article. I wanted to share it with you all. It is, to me, it just brought a laugh. A typical right wing in the dark days in which we live with respect to liberty, genuine liberty from a libertarian standpoint. The right wing's always good for a few good laughs. This is Trump Watch. Look forward to talking to y'all next time. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and thanks for your great support of the Future of Freedom Foundation.